Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Shvi'is, Perek Aleph, Halacha Hey, and Halacha Vav. We're learning today Dav Vav. We left off on Dav Vav, Amid Aleph, all the way on top of the Amid, and we just learned on Dav Hey, Amid Beis that there are two laws or two practices that were originated in Bavel. And when the people came to move back to Eretz Yisrael in the beginning of the times of the second Beis HaMikdash, these practices were accepted in Eretz Yisrael. Number one, mafshutisa de tanisa, and as we interpreted, that means that they allowed themselves to completely prostrate themselves on the ground during public fast days. What would be the issue with that? So we have in the pasuk, we have in the Torah, the prohibition, the Evan maskis, that we are not allowed to prostrate ourselves completely on a stone other than in any place other than in the Beis HaMikdash. That is us in Midoi Raisa, always, forever. However, what were to happen if one is not prostrating himself completely on a stone, but there is a floor that's not stone, whatever the material is? Midoi Raisa, you can bow down to Hashem anywhere. We're talking about, again, fully extending the hand and the feet. Pishut Yodayim Veraglayim. But Midrabanan, you're not allowed to do that. Midrabanan. So what they decided in Bavel is that on a fast day, one is allowed to do it, not on a stone floor. And this is what we are saying, that when the Yidden that came from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, when they made Aliyah, people in Eretz Yisrael accepted this exception, and people began to bow down to Hashem as long as you're not on a stone floor. I want to say something interesting that, as we'll see in the beginning of today's Gemara, there might be, according to one interpretation, a pushback on that, and we distance ourselves so much by doing Pishut Yadayim Veraglayim on the floor, even if it's not a stone floor. Is that what we do is that we separate our foreheads from the floor with something. Interestingly, by Tachnun, the name of Tachnun is Nefilas Apayim. And if you know, that's a din, the Ramah writes it, that when even now, we don't even go on the floor, we sit down. Some people stand and they lean, we're supposed to separate our forehead from the table, from whatever it is we're leaning on with something. People use their sleeve, people use the strap of the tefillin. All of this originates from this concept. Because the Isur of Pishut Yadayim Veraglayim, let's go to the beginning, biblically, on a stone floor, is resolved. Means if a person is going to extend the hands and the feet, but they put something between their forehead and the floor, they are already not violating anything Midoi Raisa. That's why in many shuls, especially if there is a stone floor, during Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, even though we don't do Pishut Yadayim Veraglayim, I don't know if you notice, sometimes they give out these paper towels. If people make a mistake if they think it's to put it on your knees. It's not to keep your garments clean. It's since we fall on our faces on the floor, we want for there to be something separating the forehead and the floor, just to make it clear what that's for. Now, that we only do if it's stone. Because even though we're not extending our hands and our feet, we still don't want to do a real bona fide nefilas apayim. The face should not be on the floor unless there's something that's separating the forehead from the floor. But coming back over here, that was the first practice. The second one is arafta de yoma shviyah, and as we interpreted, that means is that there's a minhag to take on what we call Hoshana Rabbah, which is really the seventh day of Sukkot, to take an arava and then to bang it on the ground. We're going to open up today's daf by a line in which the Chachamim in Caesarea, in Kesarin, they disagreed, and we'll see exactly what are they disagreeing with. There'll be two ways of understanding the Gemara. Either that they are arguing with this mafshutiso de tanisa, that no one accepted that in Eretz Yisrael, because we want to really distance ourselves from this lab of a Evan Maskis, or maybe another interpretation on the top line of today's daf is that don't tell me that there are two practices. Really, we adopted a third practice. And the third practice, when we'll learn the Gemara inside now, I brought with me a Gemara Shabbos Bavli, but some pratim of this third practice we'll read from the Gemara in Bavli. Now, the Gemara is going to speak about a scenario where a sapling, that's the dinim that we're learning about. What happens if a sapling produces as much fruit, as much produce as mature trees? Or what will happen if you have a mature tree, an Elon, but it's so weak, it's so frail? Like, why did Hashem give this exception to the Eser Netiyos? We said, because the concept is, there are certain trees that if you will not plow until Rosh Hashanah, then you're going to go a whole 7th year without plowing, the tree might die. So we plow until Rosh Hashanah. Do we apply that? What were to happen if you have a bona fide Elon, but it's weak? And a person who understands the health of trees, this tree needs to have plowing done more. We'll see whether we can extend this halacha l'Moshe Messinai heter or not. It's going to be a little bit of a nuanced amid. That will be Davav Amid Aleph. And on Davav Amid Beis, we're going to have halacha vav. We're going to have the new Mishnah. The Mishnah will continue to speak about the din of Eser Netiyos, but we're going to add something interesting. Deluyan gourds, I know we learned about gourds in the previous Masechta. They also have unique dinim vis-a-vis the space you have to leave between gourds. If you have 2 rows of gourds and you want to plant something else in between, you see, a gourd resembles a sapling. First of all, it has long branches that we learned in the previous Masechta. It bears fruits, and it needs nourishment from a relatively large area. And this is the key, like saplings, this gourd, these deluyan, they are frail, and they also might die if you don't plow up until Rosh Hashanah. So we're going to see how much could we extend the law of Eser Netiyos to deluyan. There'll be 2 opinions in the Mishnah, as we'll see it inside. The Mishnah will record a 3-way machlokes tanoim. How do you define a sapling versus an elon? When does it go from being a frail sapling into being a mature tree? 3 opinions. And the final halacha that we will learn in the Mishnah, all on the Vav Amid Beis, is that what happens if you have a mature tree and you cut it down almost all the way until the ground? In other words, you chopped off, you cut it down. When do we say that if from the little stump a new growth comes out, when do we say, this is a new tree? If it's a new tree, dinoi, it's a din of a sapling. Or when do we say that since the tree before you cutting it down was already considered an elon, even though you cut it down, if it continues to regrow, to regenerate, it's not a new tree regenerating, it's the old tree regenerating, so it's not included in the din of the Eser Netiyos, it's included in the din of the 3 trees in an area of a Beisa. That will be today's daf, Chevra Davav Amid Aleph. Let's go all the way to the top of the Amid. So again, after we quoted the 2 minhagim that were accepted even in Eretz Yisrael, Mafshutisa Titanisa and Ba'arafta the Yom Shvi'ah, says the Gemara that you should know that the Rabbanan, the case it in Amrin Af Hada Makasta. Now Af Hada Makasta means 2 things. First, we're going to learn the Marafulda, then we'll learn the Pnei Moshe. Now the word Makasta means this is like bloodletting. What does it mean? This is like bloodletting. So the Marafulda, the top writes, Mashal hu sho'emrim kach ledavar she'enoi b'shleimus. If someone makes a statement that's not wholesome, one way of criticizing it is by saying, this is like bloodletting. What does that mean? Ka'adam she'enoi b'kaf habrius. This is like a person that needs to have their blood let. V'tzorach hakaza. Why? Because v'nechlash, the week before, they got weak on the day of. Hachinami kan eino b'shleimus. He was just saying you're wrong. Meaning, v'loi koi, he's not debating the second va'arafta the yom shvi'ah. He agrees that indeed was accepted even in Eretz Yisrael, but he's referring to Rakal Tainus Sibur. Meaning, says the Marafulda that the Chachamim of Kisaron hold she'af b'Tainus Sibur einoi b'pishat yadayim v'raglayim. To fully do Pishat Yadayim V'Raglayim, even on a non-stone floor, even on a public fast day, they didn't accept doing that. Rakatia alatzad, they still leaned on their side. What does it mean to lean on their side? Chavre, exactly what we do. Not what we do Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. But when we say Oleinu, or when we read about the Seder Avodah, Hatoya Latzad is what we do right now, is that we lean on the side. And like I mentioned, even when you do that, you put something in between. If you're leaning on your arm, you put something in between your forehead and your arm. At kedei kach. Okay, so that's the Marafulda. Now the Pnei Moshe understand is completely different. That the Rabbanan de Kesaden, they agree that everyone accepted Mafshutisa de Tanisa. Everyone accepted that after the Yom Shviyah. But don't tell me there were only two practices. There is a third practice that was adopted in Eretz Yisrael. Meaning, look inside the top Pnei Moshe, top line, Af Hadom Akasta, Af Minik Hakozom, the minik that they initiated in Bavel, which is there is what day should you and what day should you not have your blood let. Where do we find this topic? So the Yerushalmi doesn't even quote the details. So the Pnei Moshe says Kidamrin and Beshili Pedek Mifanen, which is Babli Shabbos Pedek Kuf Chavtes Umi Bavel Hu Haminig. So for a moment, I'm going to open up a Shabbos Pedek Kuf Chavtes. It's Pedek Shmoina Asar Pedek Mifanen, and the Gemara says like this. I'm reading inside the Gemara that Va'amar Shmuel Pursa de Dama means bloodletting should only be done either Chad B'Shapsa on Sunday, or Arba'a, or on Wednesday, or Umali Shapsa on Friday. When should it not be done? I mean, obviously not on Shabbos. That's the Isur Dairaisa, right? Shchita, you're taking blood out. Af Sheni v'Chamishi Loi, Aval Shem Chavishi Loi, not to do it on Monday and Thursday, the Amar Mar, Mishi Yesh Schus Avos, only if you have Schus Avos Yakas Dam, also B'Sheni v'Chamishi. What's different on Sheni and Chamishi, says the Gemara over there, Shebezdin Shal Mailav v'Shal Mata Shavin. Because since you have, really, I'm reading inside the Rashi, that Adam Nidain B'Chol Yoy. There's a judgment every day, but Ubezdin, Yoishin B'i Yarais. When does the Beis Din officially open up in the cities? The Beis Ubehei, and that is from the times of Ezra ve'Elach. The Kivin, the Yoim Hadin Upkidehi. People remember, people are looking into you. Avoy Noisav Niskarim. It's amazing that the Gemara doesn't say that the tzaddik should do it, because ain't tzaddik about it. If you have schus avos, no, you're protected. So that's Monday and Thursday. Now the question is, why not Tuesday? What's wrong with Tuesday? So the Gemara says, "B'talasa b'shapsa on Tuesday, my kamaloi mishum the kaimela ma'adim, because the mazel of Mars is bizave. So what that means is that the mazel of Madim is dominant in even hours. That's what Rashi says, b'sha'ois zugois. And if you remember from the end of Psachim, the whole topic of zugois, that there's some opening for demonic forces when things come in pairs. And since Mazel Mazim is dominating on the even hours, and Mazel Madim is, Rashi is saying, Memuna, ala cherev, ala dever, ala puraniyos, etc. And v'hazugis koshem heim reshus l'shedim, v'hapuraniyos muchanim. So don't make yourself vulnerable if it's a difficult moment. The Gemara asks, just concluding it, that on Friday also, Mazel Maidim dominates on even hours. We learned about this. We'll learn about this another time. Who explains this amazing is Rabbi Kaplan in Sefer Yetzirah, but not for now. We won't have enough time to finish the daf. So he says, Friday you have the same problem. So says the Gemara, Kivun du dashu bei rabim, since most people don't adhere to it, shomer psoim Hashem. Okay, and we'll leave it at that. This is loaded, every single line over here. When do we say shomer psoim? When don't we say shomer psoim? Bottom line is,
doesn't bloodletting make you weak on Friday, and you can't be? It affects how you keep Shabbat.
Doesn't affect how you keep Shabbos. Let's remember where it says, but there are many things Chazal said not to do on the day that you let blood. Maybe if one of the things one should not do is have marital relation. So let's say if one is allowed to be with one's wife, you have a mitzvah of oina, and Talmud Chachamim Leil Shabbos, to do it Friday night. So then maybe you shouldn't do it that Friday. That's a different topic. But we're not talking that's a unique circumstance. But b'chlal, we don't do it we only are makers nam on Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday. Okay, now let's come back to our universe. Says the Gemara, That's a great picture. It's good. I know we mentioned this many, many, many years ago. Just this word that the Evan Maskis originally, before the Darabanan, if you could do Pishat Yadayim V'Raglayim, as long as you separate your forehead from the floor, you're not prostrating fully. And that's how it began, that we already began to cover our faces. The only place where we don't cover our face is in the Makom HaMikdash. And again, Midrabanan, we don't do Pishat Yadayim V'Raglayim today ever. I don't think we do. We don't do it. I'm to the practice. We don't do Pishat Yadayim V'Raglayim on public fast days. That's why the Mara Fulda is saying a fact. It was not, even if it was Niskabel, at some point we stopped doing it. Okay, now let's.
Well, we don't do all that stuff on the fast days where like you put the thing in the street and
very good, Danny. Yes, I agree with you. Yeah, we don't do any of that. And they added brachas and the Shemona Esrei. Remember all of that. Okay, funny we learned in the Bryce. Now here we have a double question, like we mentioned in the intro. Aleph. What do you do if you have let's go with one Tana says, Netiyos is the first year of planting. Let's go with that. It's in the first year, and it's a blessed tree. It's giving a lot of produce. What's a lot of produce? If you remember, what did we learn the last couple of days? That when the din of the 3 trees in a Beisah, we said every tree has to give a minimum of 20 mana weight if it would be figs. Okay, what happens if you have a sapling that's giving that amount? Does it change? Does it change? So that's the first thing in the Braisa, that Netiya, that is me'ain, a Netiya that is productive. No, Netiya that's productive. So how do you judge it? Says the Braisa, it doesn't help. Me'ain Eser. Me'ain Eser means it's still subject to the law of Eser, which means that if we don't say, if you have 3 of them, right? If you have 3 of them, then you can plow the whole Beisah. We don't say that. What we do say is that the only time you are allowed to plow that Beisah is if you have 10. You have to have 10. Now, what's the Havamina? I want to tell you what the Havamina is. The Havamina of the Gemara is that that's something that the Braisa didn't say, is that if you do have 10, you can plow until Rosh Hashanah. Guys, halt up what I just said. No, the misunderstanding in the beginning was the Braisa is saying that a Netiya that is giving a lot of fruit still is Me'ain Eser. It still has the din of 10. The Braisa is speaking about the din of 10 L'chumra, to make it clear, which means that you can't say if you have 3 of them, there's a heter. You need to have 10. But if you have 10, you can do until Rosh Hashanah. We're going to see that's a mistake. The next statement is the opposite. What happens if you have a zakena? A zakena, we had this lashon already yesterday. It means an ilon. It means a non. If it's not a sapling, either you call it mature or you'll call it old. Uzakena, in other words, now I want to make it clear. Zakena, Danny, does not mean it's not giving the 20 mana. It doesn't mean that, in my understanding. I know the art school wrote otherwise. I know that clearly from the Zakena means the logic behind allowing a 10 saplings plowing until Rosh Hashanah is because if you won't plow it, that tree will die. Or it might die. What happens if you have a Zakena that the guy who understands plants is telling you this needs more plowing? It's a frail tree. It's weak. It needs more chizuk through the plowing. Says the Braisa, it's still subject to me'en shalish. Now, what does that mean? Still subject. The Braisa means lakula. And let me tell you what it means before what it does not mean. It means that if you have 3 of those trees, what happens if you have 3 netiyos? Doesn't do anything for the din of netiyos. If you have 3 zakenois, even though they're frail, but we still give the lenient rule of 3, that if you have 3, you can plow until Shavuos. Don't forget, guys, by netiyos you can plow until Rosh Hashanah. The leniency of the 3 is that not until Pesach, until Shavuos, but you can't do after Shavuos. So that's where we get tripped up. When the Braisa was read initially, we understood all the way that netiyah that's very productive still has the din of 10, no matter what. And a zakena, even though it's frail, it has the din of 3, no matter what. The problem is that if that is the meaning of the Braisa, we're calling this Braisa number 1. The Gemara brings Braisa number 2 that mamish contradicts it. Esachame, come in here. It's like Toshima, come and see. And now, even though he's quoting the beginning of the Braisa, I'm just going to call it number 2. If not, you're going to get confused because the Gemara quoted first what I'm calling number 1, and now the Gemara quotes another part that happens to be the Reish of the Braisa, that Netiya Shehi Neres Kizakena. If you have a sapling and it's very productive, I'm going to interpret it to mean that it's giving 20 mana. If it would have been a fig tree, or if it is a fig tree, then it's giving 20 mana weight. The Braisa says it's not a sapling. You actually give it something like the zakena. But does that not contradict what we just said? And now you said, I'm calling it number 1, the tia me'ein haser. That's a problem. So the Gemara.
Rabbi, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
When it comes to Netiya, aren't we cautious that there is also the Orla, the Din Orla for the Netiya? So we say, what are we trying to save here?
Absolutely, Kam. Very good point. What Yakir is saying. We will actually see soon in the Mishnah that Orla will be one of the understandings of Netiyos. We're not trying to have the fruit. We are trying to make sure that the tree will not die, and that's something that I'm allowed to do. If not, you'll never have trees. Okay. So the Gemara is very simple. You have to just know there's many girsa'os, and the amazing job of the Ois V'Hadar and now of the art scroll is that they're choosing one version of how you read it, and it's very simple. I'll tell you it by heart. There is a leniency and a stringency when it comes both to a young tree and to an old tree, as we'll see. And when what I'm calling Braisa number 1, when we're saying Nitiya Me'ein Eser, it only meant L'chumra. It did not mean it L'kula. I'll read it inside. Amar Rab Chuna, I'll tell you. What does it mean in what I'm calling Braisa number 1? That a Netiya that's very productive, it's already giving a lot of fruit, is still subject to the law of Eser. Like I mentioned, it means She'ein Netiya Me'ein Shalosh. It means that we will never say that if you have 3 such trees, the 3 will give you any leniency. 3 will give you no leniency. Shaloi Taimar, don't come and say that Shalosh Netiyos, if you have 3, even though they are physically still young, but if Shehem Oisais, Kishalosh, the Kenois, Shoisais, you would think that 3 somehow change the status of the Beisah. We don't say that, Chav. The only thing that can change the status of a Beisah by Netiyos are 10. However, this is what's important. But on the other hand, Danny, if you have 10 such Netiyos, we don't say that you can plow until Rosh Hashanah. Listen to me. That we won't say.
10 what?
If you have 10 Netiyos that are overproductive, we say you need to have 10. 3 won't do anything. It won't change the status of the Beisah. But when you have the 10, we will not give you the leniency of Netiyos. Why not? Because a tree that's already able to produce 20 mana or more, such a tree is not vulnerable to say that if you're not going to plow it until Rosh Hashanah, the Netiyos will die. When can you plow it until? Only until Shavuos. In other words, it's not that, and that's it. So what I'm calling Braisa number 2, or when I'm reading the words Netiya Shehi Nidas Kizakena At Noisna Kizakena, you know what that means? It means you can only plow it until Shavuos. That's beautiful.
You have 3, you're good.
In other words, it's a double chumrah. And now the same thing in the opposite. Udekavasa, what I'm calling the first braisa, because the second part of what I'm calling the first braisa is uzekena me'ein shalosh. What does that mean? Like we explained, it means that if it's unproductive, you would think, if it's unproductive, then you need to have 10. No, you don't need to have 10. I forget about unproductive. It doesn't fit. The art school, I think, made a mistake. If you have 3 that's frail, you would think if it's frail, to change the status of the Beisah, you need to have 10. We're lenient. We say, no, you don't need that. Let's read it inside. Udekavasa, again, the Girsa. Shalosh zekenois. She'enon oisan kishalosh netiyoi she'ein oisas. I understand the word she'ein oisas with all respect, not that it's not producing enough. I'll tell you why I'm saying that. Because if 3 don't produce, we already learned explicitly about those dinim before. If you have 3 that doesn't produce, what did the Mishnah tell you? It doesn't change the status of the Beisah. What the Braisa is trying to say is that you would think that you would think if you have zekenois that are very frail, since they're very frail, just like by the netiois, 3 doesn't do anything. But I was saying a leniency. 3 does. If you have 3 trees, not only are you always allowed to plow under the tree and around the tree, 3, even if they are frail, if they are beyond the year, according to one Tana, they upgrade the whole Beisah. But 1 second, Danny, how do they upgrade the Beisah? So don't misunderstand the Braisa to say they upgrade the Beisah like Shalosh Ilanois only until Shavuos. No. They upgrade the Beisah, and you know what? You can plow that Beisah all the way until Rosh Hashanah. So it's a double heter, shkoyach. It's exactly what we're saying.
Oh, I want to change the definition of a sapling to a regular tree.
Don't do that.
After
Don't do
it
that.
starts producing.
Hold your thought, Kevin. I just want to read it inside because this is nuanced and it's going good. And therefore, concludes the Gemara, Lefum kach tzarech meimar. In other words, since we had an apparent contradiction in the same Braisa regarding Netiyah, and we're making the Braisa consistent. So as we limited what I'm calling Braisa number 1, Netiyah me'ein aser is not lekula ulechumra. It's lechumra ulechumra. So therefore, when the Braisa says Unetiyah me'ein shalosh, it's not kula and chumra, it's a double kula. So lefum kach tzarech meimar, that Netiyah me'ein eser uzekena me'ein shalosh. So let me just give a good summary over here, that if you have a Netiyah that's very productive, number one, when do we say that these trees upgrade the status of the whole Beisah? Only when they have 10. The Netiyos are giving a lot of produce. Doesn't matter. If they are Netiyos, for you to change the status of the whole Beisah, you need to have 10. However, there's a chumrah mitzad sheni. Since they're giving a lot of produce, it's a logical thing. The halacha l'Moshe Sinai that you can plant the whole thing until the Rosh Hashanah does not apply to them. It's crazy. Oy bazoi, 3 should be enough. No.
Right.
Good.
Either it is or it isn't. Yeah, we're saying,
Let me speak to the other side. Yeah, that's exactly what the Braisa. And on the other side, I'm going to go with the words, you have weak, mature trees. Weak, mature trees are subject to 2 kulas. Number 1, only 3 changes the whole status. But hold on, by Ilanois, when it changes the status, all you accomplished, right? That's what Danny, from Pesach until Shavuos. No, since they are weak, logically, the halacha l'Moshe Sinai for them, or under it, around it, is until Rosh Hashanah. Now that 3 changes the status of the whole Beisah, you can plow the whole Beisah all the way up until Rosh Hashanah. Gewaldig. Okay, Atkan halacha. The sugya davava mid base. Now let's continue quoting the Braisa, because what we had until now was only a stay ilan, and I know we never learned it yet inside, but the lashon in the Mishnah regarding other lands is stay lovin until Pesach. Here comes a question: people would plant bushes of reeds for them to grow the reeds and for them to have lumber, and we did just learn about it a few days ago. Regarding the prohibition of Shemitah, don't think that since it's not for fruit, we learned that you have all of the prohibitions of working the land, even for such trees. The Mishnah called it before Ilan Sirak. The Braisa here is speaking about bushes of reeds. So says the Braisa, stay kanim, if you have a field of reeds, you would have a havamina that what? Since people planted them for the reed to become thick, so it should have a din of an ilan. If it would have a din of an ilan, then you can plow on the 6th year until Shavuos. Says the Braisa, you cannot. It has the din of a state tvua. Comes along the Gemara, and the Gemara says, 1 second, I'm going to limit the law of the Braisa. Rabbo b'shem Rabbi Yoisa bar Reb Chanina. When do we say that? Now we're giving an example of 10 bushes. If 10 bushes is not in the Beisah, if you have less than 10 in a Beisah, the way he words it is that you have 10 in Tusa. But if you have 10 such bushes of reeds in an area of a Beisah, then what will be the din? We will give the din of these reeds the same din of netiyos. And you will be allowed to plow the entire field until Rosh Hashanah. So it's amazing that when you learn the Braisa appears to be saying something very stringent. And now we are qualifying it to something very lenient. So Sedei Kanim Nidoinis Kistei Tvua. You know what he's really saying? The field cannot be plowed after Pesach. But under the reeds and around the reeds, you can plow until Rosh Hashanah. Elomah doesn't affect the whole field. But if you have 10 in a Beisah, then it affects the whole field. And the leniency that we will give to the Kanim will apply to the whole field. It's almost like when you read a pasuk in Chumash and then you have the Torah Shabbat Peh, that it makes it the opposite. Here you have a Braisa, and he, Rabbi Bo, B'Shem Rabbi Yossi Bar Rab Chanina, Mamish understands the Braisa the opposite the way we would have understood it. In other words, bushes of reeds that are planted for the lumber, they are considered saplings. That's the way he understands it. We don't know. No, of course we know that, because if you're not going to plow it, they'll die. It's about frailty. Now, no, everything is going on that logic. Don't forget, guys, we're not talking about the Shemitah year. We're talking about the 6th year. When did Hashem want us to already rest the land on the 6th if you're not going to, if things won't die? You know, the first heter of Chol HaMoed is Davar Ha'avot from the 5 Heterim. Same concept. And especially according to the Rishonim that learn that Chol HaMoed is really Yom Tov. It's more Moed than Chol. You begin with Isur B'Lacha. Elamah, you have a Tatum. Where do you find you have a heter? In many areas in Halacha, we say, Hefsid Meruba. There was such a concept. So it's amazing. All state Kanim, the Doinis, state Svua is the opposite of what you think. Now, furthermore, the din of Esenetiois is not like the din of Ilonis. By Ilonis, even though you have to have 3, we mentioned 3, they can be formatted in any way. If you remember before, in the Dinim and Bava Basra, there was a Machlokes Rav and Shmuel by the 3. Whether when you make a sale and you only verbally speak about the trees, you want to know whether the land under and in between and beyond Kimaloi Oid is included or not. Rav says it has to be a triangular. Then Shmuel says even a shura. Oh, so that means 3, even a shura are good. What did the Mishnah say over here? The Mishnah says over here that the 10 trees, the Mishnah says, cannot be in a line. They cannot be in a semicircle. They have to be, right, the way Vlad pointed out, let's make a rectangular 10, and you have 2 rows. In other words, 2,500 square amas is a beisah. Every sapling has to be in its 250 square amas. That's why it makes sense. You can plow the whole beisah, because that's what every tree needs. Says the Gemara, when it says in our Mishnah that if the 10 saplings were keshura, or if they were made like an ark, even though you are always allowed to plow under these saplings and around it until Rosh Hashanah, but it doesn't upgrade the status of the Beisah. The Beisah cannot be plowed from Pesach. Okay. So says the Gemara, Leis Hada Pliga al Shmuel. Maybe this is a raya or a question against Shmuel. Again, Shmuel says in Bava Basra that we learned that the Mishnah says that if you sell 3 trees, that they include the land with it, it's even if it's not a triangular, even if it is ba'asuyin shura. So l'chu'ura, wouldn't it have to be the same over here? So the Gemara says absolutely not. Absolutely not. Bava Basra is not speaking about saplings, and therefore Talmud over there in Bava Basra, in the case where Shmuel opined, he was more, I'm not going to say the word lenient, because it depends from whose perspective, from the seller's perspective, from the buyer's perspective, that he's more siding with the buyer. The buyer gets more, even though they are in a straight line. Since they're speaking about larger trees, even if the larger trees are not spread out in a beisah, they're not. When you have a triangular, it goes here, it goes. There's 2 rows. It's in 1 row. The branches take up a lot of space. Whereas if you were to look at that area, even if they are in a line, the branches goes yamav akema tzfayna v'negba. I know that Rab spoke about can you plow in between only when you can't plow at all. But atroya oisa ki'ilu maleya. So since the branches of one go close to the branches of the other, they are bigger trees, makes more sense that the trees included the land that is under the trees. It's not completely that way, but the branches occupy more space. Since Beram Hachi over here, we're speaking about saplings, and saplings have very small branches, especially as we'll see soon in the Mishnah. According to some Tanoim, it's only in the first year. So therefore, kulam nesunim b'makem echad. What that means, kulam nesunim b'makem echad. If they're not evenly spread out in the Beisah, they look like they're only in one place. Who teaches the Gemara this way? Look inside the Rashi Ilio, the last line on the right. Umeshane. That's the way he understands the answer. Gabe esenetiyos over here. Kiven the stomach. Elahem anofim. They probably don't have branches. That's why they're still saplings. The top of the left column in the Rashi Ilio, loy mechsek ilu kol asada meleya. Doesn't look like it's filling up the whole field. When does it give an appearance that the 10 are taking up the whole field? If they are mifuzaris, that means that they are equally spread out in the area of the Beisah. Avol keshuda, if they would only be in one line, so nidin kulan b'makim echad nesunim, they look like they're in one place. And ve'ein makim lahatfisam kol Beisah. Why would you include the whole Beisah? Don't forget one thing the whole time, that even if it doesn't include the Beisah, one will always be allowed to plow under the sapling, under the branches, and around Kimaloi Oida Vasaloi until Rosh Hashanah. What we are trying to accomplish with this topic is to say it's not just the tree defines the whole area. So Shmuel is saying, to define a sapling, that has to be more spread out. In a sale of trees are bigger, the branches already give that spreading out. And Vlad, in addition to the roots. But by roots, you can't see. Roots, don't forget, trees have roots, they go further. Saplings have smaller roots. But we're not mentioning roots, we're mentioning of what it looks like, especially when it comes to a sale. Okay, now let's go on to this Mishnah. Halacha Vav. So there's three parts to the Mishnah. Part number one is that the halacha l'Moshe Sinai of esenetiyos is not just about esenetiyos. Unique to gourds, either according to one Tana, a gourd is mamish like an etiyah, and again, a gourd, they resemble a sapling. Number one, they have long branches that bear fruit. Number two, it requires nourishment from a relatively larger area than other vegetables. And number three, like saplings, they are frail, always frail, and if you will not plow them for a certain amount of time, they will all die out. So there's a lot of similarities. The question is, how much do we include it in the din of esenetiyos? One opinion will say that if you have 10, but 10 are not netiyos, you have roiv netiyos, which is 6 trees, and 4 deluyan. Since the roiv are netiyos, we will include the gourds to make the number 10 with all of the rules we just learned. They have to be equally spread out, and then you can plow the whole Beisah until Rosh Hashanah. The other Tana says, no, that the din of deluyan is that deluyan are mamish like saplings. I don't need saplings. Not only do I not need to have roif netiyos, even if I have 10 deluyan, the same din. Let's read it inside. Hanetiyos, the first Tana holds, Hanetiyos v'had deluyan, mitzvah from the toich beisam. The Gemara will tell us clearly that the Tanakama holds that when could deluyan be included to making up the number 10 netiyos, as long as you have the majority netiyos. 6-4. Already 5-5 won't be good. Vadai, not only not 50, if you have roiv deluyan, it doesn't change the Beisah. Every netiyah, you will be allowed to plow under and around. But to upgrade the area as a Beisah, that all of it can be plowed until Rosh Hashanah, we do know there's a shidduch here with deluyan, but you have to have a majority in the netiyos. However, Rabban, Shimon, and Eliel says, no, that's not my tradition. He had a Masoida that deluyan kinetiyos, legamre, that asara deluyan, the toich beisah, chorshen kol beisah ad Rosh Hashanah. A gourd is mamish like a sapling. It's the same one. So that's first part of the Mishnah. Second part of the Mishnah. That's the big topic. How do you define enetiyos? Which means ad emosai. Amazing, the same name of the Pedic. Ad Amosai Nikru Netiyos. What is the cut? There'll be a certain time where you'll say, it's no longer a sapling, it's mature. When is that? 3 opinions. Rabbi Loza ben Azariah Oimer. Listen to this. It's considered a sapling up until the point that the fruits become unconsecrated. And in the Gemara, we're going to learn a machlekes. Option number 1, guys, in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutz La'aretz, we have the din of Arla. What's unique to the Holy Land is that even on the 4th year, what we call neter avoy, without you deconsecrating the produce, dinoi kemaiser sheni, there's kedusha, and it can only be eaten in Yerushalmi, but I have an option of deconsecrating it. So either the understanding in Rabbi Loza ben Azariah, ache yachaylu means every tree is only considered an Elon when it enters the 5th year. When it's either kadosh arla, kadosh means you cannot have it, or on the 4th year, even though you could deconsecrate it, but without it there's kedusha, then it's still called a netiyah. Or Rabbi Loza ben Azariah says only the 3 years of arla. Because since on the 4th year you are able to deconsecrate it, we already view it as something that's deconsecrated. We're going to learn that soon in the Gemara. Shita number 2, Rabbi Yeshua.
But according to that opinion, what about Revi?
What about?
Revi, Neta Revi. The
just
4th
said
year.
In other words, we'll see either the netiyah is called a netiyah up until the 5th year or up until the 4th year. Just touching what he's saying. Every tree, from when you plant it, you have to know how to count the years. That's another topic. Until the 4th or until the 5th year, it's called netiyah. Afterwards, it's called an ilan, which an ilan is either called mature or called old, or zakena. Now, Rabbi Yeshua Oimer, look at this. Bas sheva shonim. Wow. Now, I want to tell you that in the Gemara, we're going to see that Rabbi Yeshua's shita is not on all trees. It's on some trees. Kol hashvin chavivim. There's something that the 7th, there's something about a cycle of 7. And it's the 7th, not on the 8th.
The 7th, the transition
is from the 6th to the 7th.
Right.
Doir hashvin.
I learned how luckily, like kids that are 6 years old, that's also the age where
We take them into cheder.
right? So like that's the age you have to support your kids.
Very good. Very good. B'diuk.
7,
So here we go. So we have a lot of correlations between man and a tree again over here. So it's either upshetanish, right? 3, 4, or entering the 7th. Something changes by the 7th. We become matured. We're just not 7 yet. That's our problem. Rabbi Kiva Oimer, maybe that's our benefit. Rabbi Kiva says, now listen to his words. Netiyah kishma. Machlek is what he means. Either it means, netiyah means the 1st year. Rabbi Kiva understands, a sapling means the 1st year. Or no, it's so subjective. If people call that tree a sapling, it's called a sapling. Once people refer to that tree as a mature tree, then it has a din of a mature tree.
Kayvon's picture, whatever it says.
But in Rosh Hashanah, we're learning that you count the years of the trees from Rosh Hashanah, not from whatever, Tu B'Shvat or whatever, right?
So no, Yakir is right. There's 2 ends. When it comes to Arla, there's the beginning of the 3 years. The beginning of the 3 years is Rosh Hashanah, but it's not really Rosh Hashanah. No, it's for it to take root before Rosh Hashanah. If I'm not mistaken, you have to plant it up until the 15th of Av. Because it takes 2 weeks for this and 1 month for that. You need 2 weeks and 1 month. And then the end is Machlekes Beishamai and B'Silom. Very good, Yakir. So in other words, I'm not even going into how do you count the years. I just mentioned that. However you count the years, either look how many opinions you have in the opinions. Either 3 years, 4 years, 6 years when you enter the 7th, or the 1st year, or how people call it. Let me just read the last part of the Mishnah and we'll end over here. It's amazing. It's amazing.
It's too hard to figure it out. You just got rid of it.
Okay, now the final din. If you have a tree, the tree is however you defined a mature tree or an alta tree, it already reached that age. Says Akena, okay? Now the chacham, the owner, cut the tree, the trunk down. And then from the trunk comes a new growth. Very simple. I know the same question you can have by Arla. What we're talking about over here, the din of Esenetiyos versus an Elon. Do you have a heter to plow until Rosh Hashanah or only until Shavuos? So the Mishnah says a very simple cutoff. If you have an Elon, Shenigmam, it doesn't matter also whether it was raised down because of the beautiful fires, whether you cut it down, doesn't matter. The tree now is all the way down to the ground, and v'hoitzi chalifin, it's giving off a new, what we call a substitute or a shoot. Mishnah says a simple rule: tefach under tefach. Mitefach ulamata. Tefach means that if when it was cut down to a drop less than a tefach. A drop less than a tefach is ois tree. In other words, it's considered the tree was eliminated, and therefore whatever grows is beginning from zero. So it has a din of an atiyah for however long an atiyah is an atiyah. But if mitefach ulamaylan, if it was raised down up until a tefach, including a tefach, but not less than a tefach, so then the Mishnah says the shoot that grows from it is not called a new shoot. It's Keilan. It's the old. It's an extension of the old tree. Divided up Shimon.
The roots are the same. Tefach are under.
That's a huge chiddush.
In other words,
like Ivan said, the roots stays the same.
It's not about the roots, it's about the level of bittul.
As a bit, I mean, okay.
It's why beautiful.
And what's the next opinion?
You have like this. For you to have something new, for there to be something new, the old has to go away. Very simple. A seed has to decompose for there to be a new thing. So if lamata me'atefach, it's the complete bittul. If the old was batel, so then the new is a new.
Because it's not visible.
Bittul, if we don't have full bittul, we're still sticking up a little bit, then